I'd like to call to order the May 8th meeting of the Chesapeake Bay Board. It is the responsibility of this board to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay. Roll call, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Roadley.
Here.
Mr. Waltrip.
Here.
Mr. O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien is absent. Mr. May.
Here.
Ms. Bowie.
Here.
You all had an opportunity to review the minutes from the last meeting. I will note that in item 7, the final closing comment is the public hearing was closed, and in fact that item was deferred and the public hearing was left open.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to approve the minutes from April 10th, 2024 with the change that you suggested.
Motion to approve as amended. Voice vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Approved as amended. We now enter the public comment period. The public comment period offers a chance for community members to express their opinions. Topics discussed shall not be directly related to a specific public hearing. To participate, speakers must provide their name and address for the record. Would anybody care to address the board in the public comment period? Hearing none, I will close the public comment period. Public hearings. So the outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At any time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. Presentations before the board are subject to time limits. After everyone wishing to speak has done so and discussion among the board has concluded, the public hearing will be closed. First item on the agenda is CBPA 24-0042 at 140 Freshwater Bay. Emily.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Emily Grogine, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 24-0042. Mr. Larry Walk, Right Construction LLC, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. James and Ms. Mary Kim for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall located at 140 Freshwater Bay within the Fords Colony subdivision in the Powhatan Creek watershed. You can see the parcel highlighted in blue here and within that Powhatan Creek watershed. The total lot size, the parcel was platted in 2008 after the changes to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 2004. The total lot size of this property is 0.58 acres, of which 31% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to construct a foot-wide retaining wall. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 120 square feet of impacts within the landward 50-foot RPA for a total of 120 square feet of impervious impacts. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 6 shrubs. The applicants have provided a mitigation plan to equal 72 shrubs for both the administratively approved home and retaining wall, therefore satisfying county mitigation requirements. Here, there's an aerial shot of the lot in question, along with the topography and the RPA buffer. And here's a site plan here showing again where that RPA wetlands are located, with the yellow highlighting the portion of the retaining wall that's encroaching in that landward 50-foot RPA buffer, and these green dots here indicate those 72 shrubs of mitigation plantings, which you can better see if we move in closer here. Again, everything in yellow that will be encroaching into the 50-foot landward buffer. And then here's the current site conditions, kind of showing the start of the retaining wall to the right here, and you can, as we move through these pictures, you can see the slope of the property. And then again, moving left more, showing kind of where that water is again, and then where the beginning of that retaining wall is further to the right. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a retaining wall. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a retaining wall is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to Section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of a substantial detriment to water quality, and the exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed. Reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed, which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicants must submit a surety of $4,500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plan equaling 72 shrubs. And this exception request for approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by May 8th, 2025, and written requests for an extension to an exception must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 27th, 2025, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Any questions for Emily?
I have a question, Emily. So for in the images there, there's large pine trees with the blue ribbons. Were those trees going to be removed, or is that just showing the path of the retaining wall?
There are some trees that are indicated in that site plan that are to be protected, so I can't speak exactly to which ones are which, but I can defer that to the applicant.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. With that, I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant or their agent care to address the board? Good evening.
All right, how's everyone doing? I'm James Kim. I'm the owner of 140 Freshwater Bay. I woke up this morning in Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm now here in Williamsburg, Virginia.
Welcome.
I'm not sure what you would like me to talk about, except that this is in the Eagles Cliff section of Ford's colony, and I'm limited by the size of the house that I could build. And I intently built this house on the survey so that it was outside of the original RPA. As you can see, I tried to stay outside of the seaward 50-foot RPA. You could see the slope at the edge of the house onto the golf course. And in working with Larry Walk of Walk Right, I really wanted to stabilize that slope with some kind of an accessory wall, as you can see there. And I think that it'll help with the drainage, it'll stabilize it, and it'll give a backyard that is actually usable by having it a little bit more level with a 3 to 4 foot slope from the back of the house to the wall. I think aesthetically, if you're standing on the golf course, it would also look very appealing to have that wall, as well as the amount of shrubs that we'll put in front of that wall. Questions or?
Any questions from the board?
Comments?
What's the height of the wall?
We're looking at anywhere between 2.5 to 3 foot high. There might be some sections where it'll be a dual wall because it's not a level slope. It doesn't slope very much from the left rear of the house, but on the right rear of the house, it slopes pretty significantly. So there might be some sections where it might be a 3 foot wall, and then there'll be another wall in front of it. But we'll have rocks, we'll have the appropriate drainage pipes.
Is there any provisions in front of the wall where water would drain into that and then seep out instead of running over the wall and plunging over the hill?
I'll speak on behalf of Larry, but he has in his specifications relief points every 50 to 60 feet, and it'll be stone filled with filter fabric, and perforated pipe from a drainage standpoint. I'm a banker and I have no idea how these walls are built, but it sounds pretty good.
You answered my question, thank you.
So regarding trees, I know there were some ribbons there. Are there going to be some large trees removed, or I guess what's the, as far as tree removal, what is the plan for that?
So my wife and I really like trees, and we want to keep as many trees as possible on the boundaries of the left and right side of the house. One of the reasons why I did buy this lot is because of the beautiful sight lines that overlooks the 18th hole on the golf course. So as you can see from the survey, I don't know what those blue things are, but I can tell you that there's a survey with tree marking with the X's, and it's really so that we could put the structure on it, and we could have some sight lines. But I'm going to try and keep as many trees on the left and right of the house as I can from a privacy standpoint, as well as it'll stabilize the soil as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Would anybody else care to address the board? Hearing none, the matter is before the board for discussion.
Mr. Chair, this seems like a pretty straightforward application here. I would, unless anybody else has any comments, I would make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-24-0042 at 140 Freshwater Bay.
Before you do that, let me close the public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Getting ahead of myself.
And I'll accept your motion. There's a motion on the floor. Mr. Wilson.
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie,
Yes.
Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 24-0045 at 275 Old Stage Road. Ms. Robin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 24-0045. Mr. Mark Boyd with Kimley Horn and Associates has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Li Hazelwood Farms via investor for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the extension of off-site public utilities that will serve 275 Old Stage Road within the Daskin Creek watershed. For reference, this is the vicinity map that was provided on the site plan for this application. 275 Old Stage is part of this parcel right around here. So the limits of the off-site utilities project are shown here in this hatched area. As a secondary view, here in blue is 275 Old Stage Road. Those off-site utilities coming down Barhamsville down here. And again, the Daskin Creek watershed shown there in yellow. Here is more aerial photography, specifically of that area of proposed work. The topography in this general area, and the resource protection area in the entirety of this area, but zoomed in more specifically at the area of proposed work and area of impact. The applicant is proposing to extend and install public water and sanitary force main utilities to serve the proposed development of the Lovett 64 Commerce Center. The impacts are proposed within the right-of-way of Barhamsville Road and are proposed within the existing shoulder section of the road. The installation of the sewer force main extension will equal 7,996 square feet, and the installation of the water main will equal 4,996 square feet of impacts, for a total of 12,992 square feet of impacts to the RPA. As all these impacts are within the right-of-way, no mitigation is required for this proposal. On the screen is the overall site plan with the 100-foot resource protection area shown in red, and then all areas of impact shown here in yellow.
Zooming in a little closer on two of those impact areas. Above, this is for the sanitary sewer force main. Below is for the water line. And flip-flopping a little bit, the top is for the water line again, and the bottom is for the force main. Here is photography coming down Barhamsville Road, looking at the portion that will be affected by the sanitary sewer, and moving down the road. And on the other side, the portion that will be affected by the water main, and again, just moving down the road. This image was provided by the applicant to show approximately the area of installation for the utilities. As stated earlier, it's within that shoulder area off of the existing road. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the extension of off-site public utilities. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because this project is outside the scope of an administrative approval. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by May 8th, 2026. And written request for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 27th, 2026, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Is this work looks like this is on VDOT right away?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
With that, I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant care to address the board?
Good afternoon. Does that work?
Yep.
Better. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Boyd. I'm with Kimley Horn. We are representing the owner of the property here for the development of the 1164 Commerce Center. So the presentation, I think, was very apt and succinct. The proposed utility extensions are coming from LaGrange Parkway down Route 30. That's the closest place that we could connect to existing public water and sewer, running those down Route 30 and then down Old Stage Road to the site. So we've tried to minimize the total disturbance. Like indicated, the utilities are to be installed within the right-of-way, within VDOT right-of-way, and really within the existing section of the current road. So we're not proposing any additional clearing with these utility installations. As you saw in that red dashed line, it's really kind of right off that paved shoulder currently. And no additional clearing. All erosion and stormwater measures will be installed appropriately. So we're here to answer any technical comments, and I also have Ben Swift, who's with Lovett, the owner and developer of the project.
Just for clarification, can you add your address?
Sure. 2035 Maywell Street, Richmond, Virginia.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Does this right away open up more business on that route, or does it just go to this one location?
There are additional properties that would be able to connect to this. It is going to be a public utility extension. JCSA will ultimately connect to, or will ultimately take into this their public system. So we have designed it to accommodate future connections of other properties that are currently undeveloped.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anybody else care to address the board on this matter? Hearing none, the matter is before the board. Any additional discussion?
Mr. Chair, I think this is a pretty straightforward request. I would be in support of it.
I concur. With that, I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board. Do I have a motion?
But I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant exception request for Chesapeake Bay, case number CBPA 24-0045 at 275 Old Stage Road.
Mr. Wilson?
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 23-0174 at 9400 Barnes Road.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 23-0174. Mr. Mark Boyd with Kimley Horn and Associates has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of LI Hazelwood Farms VA investor for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the grading associated with the construction of a building and construction of a retaining wall located at 9400 Barnes Road within the Diocesan Creek watershed. This parcel was platted prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The parcel is outlined here in blue next to the parcel we were just looking at on Old Stage Road, and again, the Diocesan Creek watershed shown here in yellow. Here is aerial photography of 9400 Barnes Road, zooming in a little closer to the area of impact, the topography at the site, and the resource protection area shown here on the side in green. A wetlands delineation and RPA study was performed in 2023 and approved by the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the county respectively. The total lot size of this property is 130 acres, of which 26% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct a building and retaining wall in association with the Lovett 64 Commerce Center construction. Impervious cover impacts to the RPA will be caused by the construction of a drive aisle and retaining wall and equal approximately 53,143 square feet of impacts to the RPA. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equal 121,045 square feet. Construction of this building will also result in permanent impacts to wetlands and stream channels. Above is the entire site plan for the Lovett 64 Commerce Center. Today we're just looking at Building 1, so zooming in specifically on that area. Above is the proposed building. The resource protection area is shown over here in red, and then those proposed RPA impacts shown in yellow. Again, most of the impact is for the drive aisle, a little bit for the building, and for a retaining wall as well. Zooming in on those impacts specifically, again, for the drive aisle, the building, and then some of the grading associated with the construction. Again, small impact area here for grading, and on this image on the right, the thicker black line is the proposed retaining wall, and then the subsequent impact associated with that construction. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious cover impact is the recordation of a deed of natural open space for an area twice the size of the impacted RPA. In this case, that is 242,090 square feet, or 5.56 acres. This must be outside of all required stormwater forested open space. Here is site photography looking at a portion of the proposed building. And again, closer down to the RPA impacts associated with this construction. Standing further back, and again, looking at the proposed area for the building and the drive aisle, and more of that general area. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the grading associated with the construction of a building and construction of a retaining wall. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the project is outside the scope of an administrative approval. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be major for the proposed development. Should the board find that this exception request meets all 5 conditions outlined above, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicant must record a deed of natural open space in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse for the additional 5.56 acres of natural open space beyond that which is required to meet stormwater management compliance for the project prior to the issuance of a land disturbing permit. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by May 8th, 2029, making this a 5-year approval. And written requests for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 27th, 2029, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Questions for Robin? Could you do me a favor and go back to the site plan and the zoomed in look at the, not the smaller impacts, that one, that right back up. There you go. So the retaining wall actually stops short of this drainage?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it's just a fill slope?
Correct.
Good. I will open the public hearing. Would the applicant care to address the board?
Good evening. Ben Swift with Lovett and 923 15th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. I also prepared some additional slides, and if it works for you all, I'd like to kind of go through a background on the project to the extent, you know, you all aren't super familiar with the rezone that was done, and just kind of work through if that works. What are the slides just on the back end? Are there additional? Okay. We had some additional slides, but we can that we can share at a later point. But if we go, can we do the overall site plan? I'll get. One more. There we go. And just for reference, there's 2 additional buildings that's in a further phase that will, exactly exist down south of the Spine Road there at full build out. But those have not been fully designed and are not in for permit at this time. But so for background, in February of 2022, this site was rezoned and an SUP was approved by the Board of Supervisors to rezone this site for economic opportunity, and specifically for roughly 3.2 million square feet of industrial, plus, as you can see on the upper right-hand corner there, about 25 to 30 acres of commercial space that would be able to be used for office, a gas station, and retail as well. And so in that SUP, it explicitly says industrial can be up to 3.2 million. And in terms of our project at full build out, it will be as a result of the RPAs and the wetlands on site, it will be roughly 2.2 million, so about 30% reduction in what we're overall approved for and allowed to construct, at least per the SUP. And then obviously, as you saw before, as a component of this project, we'll be extending utilities to the site along Barnumsville Road. And then in January of this year, we received a Corps and state DEQ permit for all of our associated wetland impacts, which I guess to be more specific includes this larger portion of wetlands that you can see here that RPA that branches out is a result of. So again, at full completion, this wetland would be permanently impacted, and therefore the existing RPA would then just solely be extending off of this main stream here. And so that approval was given in January. And so obviously, as I'm sure you all are aware, but as a component of that is we have to similarly show that, demonstrate the need and the fact that we minimize the impacts to the maximum extent possible. And as you can see, I think we definitely did. And as if you recall, we were here before the board several months ago for Building 6, and as a result of that, we did end up taking all those impacts away with the implementation of retaining walls. And then another component that I would like to mention is what you saw before, the off-site utilities that come to the site. That's a very fixed infrastructure improvement, I'll say, and a fixed cost, as is the spine road. So there's a specific amount of square footage that one could build that would merit that cost, and then there's a square footage threshold where it could not withhold that cost anymore. And that's what we went for. We went to minimize the square footage and the impacts to the maximum extent possible while still being able to withhold the cost of those infrastructure improvements, the public utilities that we'll be extending that our neighbors can tie into, as well as this road will be a VDOT road dedicated at the end of the day. So it will be built to VDOT standards, as well as the 2 stream crossings there. And then another thing I'd like to note to kind of outline why the building is the size it is. And it's a very specific size. It is almost exactly 1 million square feet. And that is because tenant requirements for this type of industrial building are very specific. They have very specific build outs for 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 foot build outs, as well as 1 million. And there's not really any requirement between 500 and 1 million. So if we were to reduce that building size to say 700,000, there isn't really a user that needs that or that would use that, and would obviously be an issue. And these 1 million square foot buildings are in very high demand. Out of all the buildings, these 4 plus the additional 2 that are much smaller, this building has by far received the most interest from tenants. And I think tenants, I have a meeting tomorrow with one, are eager to, once they have certainty on delivery, eager to occupy this building and be at this site. So that's another reason why this building is exactly the size it is. And to add, we have a buffer on the north side. I think it's 50 or 100 feet from the Interstate 64 frontage landscape buffer that we have to abide by, as well as a 100-foot buffer from Barnes Road that's fully landscaped that cannot be impacted that we have to abide by. And then the location of the spine road on the south. So we're kind of boxed in here in terms of the area we're able to work with. And so, and as a result, that retaining wall that was shown in the detail is roughly 25 feet high. And so that, I think that is, we did the best we could to get out of the RPA where we could with the implementation of that 25-foot high retaining wall. And then just to add, as it relates to stormwater runoff erosion, this site has been designed and it was proffered to have pretty robust stormwater treatment detention systems that, I mean, are probably the most robust we've built in the country, but also I think, and I can't speak, but for the county as it relates, I think it's definitely, call it what the average site is required to do +1. Given, I know there have been some erosion concerns and issues on other sites in the county, and so this was as a result of that. And so, as to mention a comment on an earlier thing, there will be no runoff off these retaining walls. It will all be detained, treated, and then very specifically put back into the stream crystal clear through a riprap right at the bottom to eliminate any erosion. And my much smarter colleague here can tell you more about that if there are any questions there. But I wanted to kind of outline the background and give you all some more kind of background, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Swift? I appreciate your explanation. My notes were purpose and need and alternatives considered, and you covered that, so thank you very much. This may be an intuitive answer, but not extending the retaining wall any further down, is it because of the height of the structure?
It's also because of the existing topography, because it's a bit, you can see it goes pretty low. That retaining wall would almost have to double in size. That would become almost a 50-foot retaining wall, which would be quite substantial and require some serious structural components. And so that's the main reason, is that it was extremely hard to get that 50-foot retaining wall there.
Good. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much. Would anybody else care to address the board on this matter? None. I will pull it back to the board for discussion. As I said in my comments, my initial questions were pertaining to the purpose and need and the alternatives considered. I think Mr. Swift covered that, at least to my satisfaction. But it's a fairly large impact, but I do understand land development and got a money out. So I would argue that they likely have minimized the impacts to the greatest extent possible, short of not building the project.
Mr. Chair, my comments, I kind of struggled with this one because I know the board doesn't make decisions on financial need. It's more water quality. And my struggle with the project, especially this portion of it, was in looking at how we handle residential units where they have, they have a half-acre lot, they need to put a house on it, so they're very limited to where they can put the house. So we make them shrink it down to fit, to minimize impact, so the minimum necessary to afford relief. So for this one's a little different in that I understand the need for the 1 million square foot financially. I guess one of my concerns is that, are we treating this like we would a residential house, as far as just looking at our considerations that we need to look at, specifically 1, 2, and 4. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges, and the exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created. So I think those are the three things that I kind of struggle with a little bit on this project. But that's kind of my 2 cents at this point.
Anybody else have any comments or questions? Mr. May, I'm wondering if the applicant would care to try to address some of your comments. The public hearing is still open.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind. I think as it relates to the need, I do agree. And I think what I would say is that, your average residential house doesn't necessarily have to extend public utilities a mile, which obviously there's and that we're burdening 100% of that cost, as well as all the off-site improvements. And so because of that, there is a threshold of where, if we can't get a certain amount of square footage, we can't afford to do those improvements. And they're many millions of dollars. And so that's really the need, and then how I would differentiate this from your typical residential impact request.
I appreciate that, and I certainly get it, and I know that you guys have done a lot to mitigate, stormwater management and everything else. So you guys have certainly, you have worked the best you could with what you have here. So I certainly appreciate that.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board. Do I have a motion?
All right, I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to accept to adopt the resolution to grant the exception Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 240031. Excuse me, we're on the wrong one. Barnes Road. Case CBPA 23-0074 9400 Barnes Road. Adopt.
Mr. Wilson,
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. May?
No.
Ms. Bowie?
No.
Mr. Roadley?
yes.
Motion fails.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Next item on the agenda is CBPA 24-0031 at 113 Glasgow.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 24-0031. Mr. Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. John and Ms. Sherry Constantino for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a single-family dwelling with an attached deck located at 113 Glasgow within the Fords Colony subdivision and the Powhatan Creek watershed. On the screen above, you can see the subject parcel outlined in blue and the Powhatan Creek watershed shown in yellow. This parcel was platted in 1988 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Here is aerial photography of the parcel, the topography at the site, the floodplain as it affects this property, and the resource protection area. This lot is 0.27 acres, of which 100% is located within the RPA. Existing conditions of this property include a wooded lot with wetlands through the middle and back of lot, as well as the floodplain that was shown on the slide prior to this one. The applicants are proposing to construct a single-family dwelling with an attached deck. Case number CBPA-23-0083 was originally heard before this board on October 11th, 2023, where it was denied. This case, CBPA 24-0031, was heard before this board on April 10th, 2024, where the applicants requested a deferral to address drainage concerns from the adjacent property owners. The original site plan, CBPA 23-0083, included 3,011 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA and 1,678 square feet of permanent wetland impacts. The applicants have since decreased the proposed house size, making the total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equal to 1,243 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA and 1,471 square feet of permanent wetland impacts, for a total of 2,714 square feet of impervious impacts. Additionally, the applicants have now included a river rock swale on the left side of the property before the existing concrete swale, 3 French drains that outfall to the proposed river rock swale, and a proposed drainage easement for the existing concrete swale and proposed improvements. To recap all of that, on the site plan above, in red, in the very corner, you'll see the 100-foot RPA and then the 50-foot RPA closer to the proposed house. The entirety of the proposed house in orange, which is within the seaward 50-foot RPA. The two wetland systems shown in green in the front, which will be impacted by this construction. The wetlands at the back of the lot will not be touched except for the selective clearing for sanitary sewer. There is also the river rock swale over here in pink, and then that proposed drainage easement between this property at 113 and the property at 115 Glasgow that is shown here in purple. Additionally, the limits of clearing is shown by this black line around the house. The minimum first floor square footage required for this section of Ford's Colony is 1,100 square feet. This proposed house has a first floor square footage equal to 1,167 square feet, which is a 6% increase. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 7 planting units, which is 7 canopy trees, 14 understory trees, and 21 shrubs. The applicants have submitted a mitigation plan consisting of 5 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 41 shrubs, therefore satisfying the county mitigation requirements. Additionally, the applicants are proposing 2 microbioretention best management, or BMPs, to manage drainage on the lot. Those are shown on the site plan above in pink behind the property. Staff is also requesting that an affidavit be recorded in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse due to the environmental sensitivity of the lot. Here is their proposed mitigation plan, again equating to 7 planting units with the addition of those 2 microbioretentions and the river rock swale to the existing culvert. Here is photography of the site. These were taken back in September of 2023 when the first application was submitted. Standing at the street and looking in towards the lot and looking at that first wetland system. Moving further into the lot, this is looking at the property at 115 Glasgow. A majority of that wetland system that exists in the middle of the property. This is that existing culvert that this property will be draining towards, and the back of the lot. This is looking back towards the cul-de-sac. These are pictures that were taken at the beginning of April this year. Gives you a different view of the property at a different time of year. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a single-family dwelling with an attached deck. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of the single-family dwelling is entirely within the seaward 50-foot RPA. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be major for the proposed development. If the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all of their necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. An affidavit must be recorded in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of a building permit. The applicants must submit a surety of $7,000 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plan equaling 7 planting units and the construction of 2 microbioretention BMP facilities. The applicants must submit to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division a letter of installation from a qualified professional confirming compliance with the approved construction plan for the stormwater BMP facility or facilities. No surveyed as-built drawings are required. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by May 8th, 2025, and written requests for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than March 27th, 2025, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions for Robin? Thank you very much.
Thank
The public hearing is still open from the previous meeting. So, Mr. Grogg, would you care to address the board?
Good evening, members of the board. Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 205 Bullifonts Boulevard, Williamsburg, Virginia, 23188. Thank you, Robin, for the presentation. As she pointed out, not too much on kind of the bigger scale of things have changed on the plan since the last meeting. Addressing concerns of the neighbor as well as the board, we added those French drains underneath the house as a way to show how the water for the existing wetlands that are there could be passed through. A majority of the finished grade on the house is actually infill. It starts at about a foot on the left side of the house and the right side of the house. By the time it's done is about 3 feet above the existing grade, so those French drains will be able to be installed and then dirt placed on top of them, so it should be a relatively easy process. There were also the concerns about the swales and the tie-in point with the existing concrete flume. So we added that kind of more robust river rock swale to catch that front water and the water in the back to tie into those existing swales. I'm happy to answer any other questions or concerns you may have.
Questions for Mr. Grogg? Thank you. Anybody else care to address the board?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Leonard C. Heath Jr. We met last time at the last meeting. I'm an attorney with Heath Verser in Newport News, 11832 Rock Landing Drive, Suite 201. I have the pleasure of representing my son today, Jordan Heath, who is the owner of Lot 59, more importantly, the downstream lot with regard to the lot that's being developed. When we were last here, I had explained that Jordan has his life savings in this house. A developer has come along and purchased this lot that is completely wetlands. They bought it for $10,000. That's a market price that clearly shows it's not developable. And they're trying to put a square peg into a round hole. What has been left out in the presentation today, again, is that there is an underground spring right in the middle of this lot where this house is going to be located. And if you look at the proposal of the developer, that also says that when the house is built, there should be positive drainage away from the house. So the wetlands are going to be turned into a completely impervious lot. The drainage is going to be away from the house. It's going to be toward Jordan's house. There's been mention of the existing swale that they're going to be using to drain this wetland to Jordan's lot. And that swale and all the facilities belong to Jordan. There is no easement agreement. There's no maintenance agreement at this point. We delayed this at the request of the applicant so they could try to work out an easement agreement. Well, I will tell you that they submitted an easement agreement that was pretty plain vanilla, like you got it out of a form book. I took it and made substantial modifications. I should also let you know that I represent a major utility company and I protect their utilities throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, parts of North Carolina, West Virginia. So when it comes to easements, I actually have a little bit of experience in this. So we made suggested changes to the easement documents that, frankly, I would say 75% were agreed to. And then we got to the point where there were some hang-ups that we could still negotiate with Ford's Colony over. We got to a point where no one was able to give us a representation or a warranty that the facilities that are currently existing on Jordan's lot, and by the way, there is, in addition to the swale, there's an underground pipe that goes under his driveway back to the common elements, the common area out toward the creek. No one could give us any representations or warranties that that pipe was properly sized to take into account the increased drainage that would be coming from this development. No one could do that. We asked Ford's Colony to put that in the easement agreement. They struck it out. We were having a discussion with Mr. Grogg about that, And the developer cut that off and said, hey, if this is going to cost me any more money, stop. I've signed the document that's been proposed, and it's filed. Problem is that the person that has to grant the easement is Jordan Heath. And so with regard to what the problems we have right now, in addition to everything I've just said, the easement agreement, they struck the language about adequacy. We put in a provision that the facilities, there would be a representation that the facilities are sufficient type, size, and character to provide proper, prompt, effective, and efficient drainage of water entering Lot 59 from other lots in the common area, which a homeowner would expect to make sure that that pipe is the proper size. Again, nobody would do that. They deleted a provision with regard to Ford's Colony duty to repair damage by reason of activity on Jordan's property with regard to the exercise of the easement. That is a very common provision that's put in easement agreements. Now, they said we struck that because it's another provision of the easement agreement. Well, there is another provision with regard to duty to repair when Ford's Colony was exercising their secondary right of ingress and egress. That's a completely different easement. This duty to repair had to deal with the primary easement, and I don't want to get too in detail about the legality of it, but it's apples and oranges in the legal field. But that probably could have been worked out except for the developer Monday night sent an email saying, hey, stop. I've signed this document. That's all I'm going to do. That's why we're here. Ford's Colony had deleted a provision I'd put into the agreement that if they went in and they disturbed any fencing on Jordan's lot, they would repair the fencing. They took that out. There was a paragraph that just needed working. I think we probably could have worked through that, but again, the developer cut that off. The developer added in a provision that Ford's Colony could contract out work. That would be fine, except there needs to also be a duty to repair if they come in and do the work, a common provision in an easement agreement. And probably most significantly, the exhibit that they attached to their agreement didn't have drawn in for Jordan's lot the footprint of his house or the location of his sidewalk or the location of his driveway. So why is that important? Well, it's important for us to know exactly where the easement is and also to document what improvements already exist on the lot so that if Ford's Colony comes in and does work and they damage the driveway, they have a duty to fix it. And they can't say, well, the driveway wasn't there or the sidewalk wasn't there. So again, all of these things that we requested are quite reasonable. I talked to the county attorney. I think that what we've requested is quite reasonable, but it was all cut off Monday night. And said, the developer says, it is what it is. Basically, take it or leave it. And of course, with regard to the easement document, and I'm not going to put it in front of you, but the easement document, 98% of the encumbrances are on Jordan's lot. Only about 2% are on the developer's lot. So he has the most at stake because he's agreeing to encumbering his property, and he's also protecting his life savings in this house. And the developer doesn't seem to care. I will also add this. A common part of the negotiation would be the property that's going to be encumbered by the easement, that property owner would ask for money. Jordan didn't do that. He didn't ask for money. He was just looking for an easement agreement to protect his property. So at this point, they put together a plan that they've got up on the screen to drain everything to Jordan's lot, but they don't have a right to use those facilities at all. And again, we get back to the basic fundamental aspect of this. This lot is a wetlands lot. It was purchased for $10,000. And somebody's coming along trying to make a buck. They're going to cause, and I said this before, and it's true today, they're going to create a problem. They're going to sell the problem. And then the problem is going to be left with Jordan and his new neighbor to try to figure out what to do. That's not right. It's just not right. So we'd ask that the application be denied. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Heath? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Would anybody else care to address the board on this matter? Mr. Grog.
Really, the only thing I want to comment on is the cutoff of, I guess, how that's being portrayed. The conversation was that the applicant has already had a drainage study completed during their previous application that was denied, that was supplied to the county, and I believe to you guys as well, that showed that that pipe is adequate for, was adequate for the previous application, which was clearing the whole lot and the more impervious. So the applicant's opinion was to not spend more money with us redefining and redoing those calculations, since they've already been proven to show that the pipe system is sufficient. And thus we have less clearing, less impervious. The equation would turn out the same way.
Thank you. Any questions from Mr. Grog? Sorry. Nope, thank you.
I had a question.
Okay.
From an engineering standpoint, and the design that you've put together for this, would you put yourself on the line and guarantee that there's not going to be a problem for the next door neighbor that owns this property? It's not going to create a problem if he builds this and sells it to somebody else and they have a problem and it's all going to fall back on the next door neighbor? Is that something that
I'll say it this way, Mr. Waltrip, and I said this to Mr. Heath after the previous meeting. In my opinion, the bigger issue with these lots are that they're fully located within a flood zone. So during any major rain event, the entire system fails. That was a discussion we had with the Heaths in between these 2 months, because it was pointed out that that report listed that this system does not function. And it functions up to the 10-year storm, and then after that, it does not function. So I think the first portion of your question, yes, it's an existing concrete swale with a pipe that's all been sized correctly. We have when that was constructed, there was a flume put in place to accept the water from this lot. I think this is all being, there's more than just our lot draining there. This system has obviously been in place for many, many, many years now. And has been pointed out that, yes, kind of based on a handshake at the moment, Ford's Colony has been maintaining it. Ford's Colony also has a pre-existing, it's either a 5-foot or 7.5-foot drainage easement along every single property line within the Ford's Colony subdivision. So some of that concrete swale already falls, and the pipe to the north already falls under Ford's Colony's responsibility because it's within their easement. The easement to the right, and again, this is more of a drainage issue than a wetland, but yes, I mean, this has all been from the water to the left being designed to swale around to the French drains, to the rock swale to tie into the already accepting channel for this water. This is the natural point that before Mr. Heath's house was built, this is the natural channel. It probably went right through the middle of Mr. Heath's house. So this is the natural channel for where this water has gone on this lot for many, many, many years.
One more question. When all of this was done, was this before the wetlands restrictions came into effect, that these swales and drainage pipes and stuff was put in place?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head the year that Mr. Heath's house was born, but yes, all his home was all constructed prior to all of that. And obviously there's wetlands to the right of it and there's wetlands on our lot. So I'll go out on a limb and say there were probably wetlands in between those 2 points.
Any other questions for Mr. Grog? Feel free, Mr. Heath, public hearing.
Your question is a very good one. In fact, my cover letter that included our revisions to the easement agreement specifically asked for representations and warranties from Chase Grog and from his company and from the developers that would go to Jordan and run with the land for those very reasons. And we haven't gotten that. I think it's a good question because I asked it. And we haven't gotten those representations and warranties. And when we put it in the agreement with Ford's Colony, they struck the language.
Thank you, Mr. Heath. Just for clarity for the board, I was reminded earlier today that while compelling the discussion this evening on the easement and the flow of water, our purview is limited to evaluating the impacts to the RPA and not easement agreements with the adjacent property owner, again, as compelling as those arguments are. So just remind the board of that fact. And the floor is open for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, this is another one of those tough Forts Colony lots. Right in the wetlands. I think certainly Mr. Groggs has done a great job in trying to mitigate the water on the lot, kind of working within the parameters that he has on the lot there, with the 2 microbial retention features and the swale. Again, this is another one of those that's just right in the middle of a wetland, so it's challenging.
Any other discussion? I share your concerns, Mr. May. I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to deny the application for the exception request. I'm sorry, for the Chesapeake Bay Board case number CB, I'm sorry, wrong one. I would make a motion to deny the application for the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-24-0031 at 113 Glasgow.
Mr. Wilson.
Motion is to deny. Mr. Waltrip?
Yes, to deny.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
That concludes our public hearings for this evening. The next item on the agenda are board considerations, and I understand we have a few items there. Miss York River State Park, a presentation from VDOT. Mr. Parfit.
Hello again. Mr. Roadley, ladies and gentlemen of the board. If I'm not mistaken, I believe everybody was here last time. I gave a presentation a couple years ago about the York River State Park project. I'm happy to be back here to talk about it some more. So I have control. Great. Yep, so there it is. Well, as we talked about before, we at VDOT, we have the special condition of our MS4 permit, special condition for the Chesapeake Bay TMDL and local TMDLs, and have been working towards our nutrient reduction goals for 10 years or so. And we, evaluated all the tools in our toolbox, stream restoration being a big one, land cover conversion, upgrading BMPs, and shoreline stabilization. And, VDOT didn't have a lot of shoreline at the scale we were looking for, so we entered into some agreements with some nonprofits and sister agencies, one of which is the Department of Conservation and Recreation. They had projects that they wanted to get done, but no funding. We had the money. They didn't need the TMDL credits, and we did. It was a nice symbiotic relationship. So York River State Park was early on identified as a candidate that was a high priority area. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with Fossil Beach at York River State Park, but here's the general location of where the work was done. Before we did our stabilization and living shoreline work. This is what the bluffs look like. You know, we were losing trees and losing sediment into the river and the Chesapeake Bay at a fairly high rate. I wish I had written it down. I'm actually going to introduce some other folks too. Back here we've got Daniel Proctor with Stantec and Dylan Constable with EQR. Stantec did the design and EQR did the construction of this project. They're available for questions as well. I just didn't want to make them stand up here while I was running my mouth. So, right, so this is what we had. We had the park had long wanted to do something with the Fossil Beach area, which is the most popular part of the park. So here's some more photos showing the slopes. So we got the MOA, and then we proposed the project. We designed it, and this is the general design. We did a cut to fill, created a bunch of marsh behind breakwaters, and expanded marsh that was already there. Here's some photos of construction. This is 2 years ago, April, showing breakwaters being constructed, the big yellow machines, and you know, here's another. We used all these sandbags that you can see in this picture to help contain the sediment while we were moving it around. You know, we brought in clean sand to create the tombolos and the widened beach behind the breakwaters. Okay, so we finished up the main original project in the summer of '22, but while we were working, we couldn't help notice another area, a couple, 1,000 feet down upstream that had some pretty serious erosion. On the main trail from the visitor center to Fossil Beach, there's a trail there that had been eroding for a long time. They kept moving the trail, and they were running out of space. They'd gotten to a point where a couple more storms, they were going to lose the trail, and a big wetland behind it was going to be exposed to wave action. The park, Daniel and I actually talked about, is there any way possible VDOT can do anything here? Around the same time, the park manager came to us and said, is there any way VDOT can do anything here? So we still were under construction on the main part of the project. So we did what we could to create a plan to get in there while we still had equipment on site and do a bioengineering stabilization to be followed by the York River State Park putting in some sort of wave attenuation. So we did the temporary stabilization measures in summer of '22. Hurricane came in October, knocked them about. We went back in the next summer, and all still while in talks with the park and DCR about how they're going to get grants, what they're going to do. DCR went as far as to purchase a bunch of oyster balls, and they were going to, but things kept fizzling. You know how funding can get with state agencies and local government. So more storm damage in '23, and we knew what we had to do. We had to get in there and do a permanent fix because we couldn't afford to keep patching it up while waiting for the park to be able to get what they wanted done. It would have been great to do that at first, but my budget was already stretched and we were running out of time before we had to close for the year. So the good news is we did get in there in '24 and did some good. These photos here, we had a professional photographer come in right at sunrise, and I'm a real big fan of these photos. This is the original project in its finished form. I was a big fan of Fossil Beach before, and personally I was a little torn about changing it. I knew that the park wanted it stabilized. I knew that the project was some project that we wanted to get done, but my concerns went away when I saw the finished product. It's still a beautiful place to be. So, sorry I'm shuffling notes around here, guys. I'm somehow all flustered. Maybe it was just, well, in any case, the agency paid for some signage. Educational signage was part of the original proposal that we brought to the park. So we have several of these signs showing what we're doing there, what living shoreline is. We've done these also at Belle Isle State Park, where we did a similar project, and at the Pipsco Boy Scout Reservation, where we did a project there as well. And we're currently working at Westmoreland State Park, where we'll do another. So the trail stabilization area. This is the main portion of our work, and then here's the trail stabilization area. You can see right here, you got the main portion. There's a beach in between and the trail stabilization. So it was a mess. As you can see in this top right photo, the trail used to go up over here. Oh, how do I get back? Can you push me back? I clicked when I was trying to point. Oh, right there, previous. Gosh, man, it's like my first day. Anyway, the trail used to go over here, and it had been moved back. And as you can see here, right on the other side of this is that wetland that was going to be exposed to wave action. Now, this place was crumbling. So it's the main route to Fossil Beach. It was disappearing rapidly at like 3 to 6 feet per year. You know, the original project, like I said, was under the time constraint of doing it while we had our equipment there. But, you know, when we saw what ended up happening, we came back. So this is our first try. These were lifts of soil and plant material with tree stumps out in front, you know, root wads sticking out, and some toe stabilization here. But this is what happened after Hurricane Ian. It tore us all to bits. Now, I like to point out to folks that even though it did tear us all to bits, it didn't tear the trail apart, and it didn't, you know, even get back as far as it was before. So it didn't work, but it didn't 100% fail either. So we went back in and fixed it again. The next summer, it blew out again. So our final plan was to come in and do something similar to what we did at the main project. We would put, instead of breakwaters, we would put a sill out there, you know, and, you know, we started in March. We finished in April. We're about to do some seeding. And this is what we ended up doing. You know, last minute today, I was trying to figure out a way to add a video. I took a video a couple weeks ago showing high tide and the waves crashing against this sill and it being very still back here. So it's really working well. This is where we are today. That's low tide, obviously. Anybody got any questions?
Questions?
I'd like to make a comment from, and I'm on the water quite often, both rivers, York, James River. And in the last few years, you look at the quality of water and how muddy it is and how it's, projects like this, I commend you that you've doing a great job, because these large projects like this contribute a lot of mud and contamination to the rivers and everything. And I think you all have done a real good job, and I think probably Jim Gunn's operation is the one that's been doing all of this, and he does an excellent job on James and also the York River. So,
well, thank you very much.
You're doing a good job.
We very much appreciate that. I'll speak for them on that. You know, I get up every morning and I'm grateful for my job because I feel like I'm doing a good job for the agency. I feel like I'm doing a good job for the Commonwealth and for the environment. So it's pretty great. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for showing the show and tell. We appreciate it.
Get in contact if you want a personal tour.
All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is CBPA 23-0030, an extension request.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Emily Grogian, Watershed Planner. Mr. Chase Grogg, Land Tech Resources Incorporated, on behalf of Mr. Howard Jones, is requesting a one-year extension to CBPA 23-0030, originally granted on July 12th, 2023, Staff concurs with this request with the stipulation that all permit conditions, except for the expiration date, be reauthorized and that the new date of expiration be July 12th, 2025.
Any questions for staff? If not, do I have a motion?
Motion to accept the extension request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA 230030 at 153 Shinnecock.
Wilson?
Motion is to accept the extension request.
Easy for you to say.
You would think so. Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Next item is CBPA 23-0060 at 499 Jolly Pond Road, also an extension request.
Sir. Mr. Ryan Stevenson, AES Consulting Engineers, on behalf of Colonial Heritage LLC, is requesting a one-year extension to CBPA 23-0060, originally granted on June 14th, 2023. Staff concurs with this request with the stipulation that all permit conditions except for the expiration date be reauthorized and that the new date of expiration be June 14th, 2025.
Any questions for staff? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to accept the extension request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-23-0060 at 499 Jolly Pond Road.
Mr. Wilson?
Motion is to accept the extension request. Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
No items of special privilege. Hearing none, I will adjourn.
Second.
We are